June 2nd, 1955. It was pitch dark. The prison corridors swallowed in silence. Only a single pool of light disrupted the gloom, the faint glow from Barbara Graham's cell. Graham was already awake, packing for her final journey. Her time at California Institution for Women in Corona had come to an end. She packed with care: red pajamas, bath powder, her favorite book of poetry, the same tailored suit and shoes she had worn at trial, a wristwatch on her arm, a wedding ring on her finger, small traces of a life that was no longer hers. At 5:45 a.m., guards escorted her from her cell and placed her, handcuffed, in the back seat of a car for the long drive to San Quentin. The road stretched endlessly before her, a 10-hour journey through California's dry, sun-baked landscape. She remained silent for most of the ride, immersed in poetry. She embraced her fate with quiet acceptance. "You always hope," she told an interviewer, "but if it is the will of God that I die, then I'll die. I'm at peace." Barbara Graham, dubbed Bloody Babs by the press, had become one of America's most infamous women, a petty criminal turned convicted murderer. She was sentenced to die for her role in the fatal attack of an elderly widow. The trial was a sensation, filled with betrayal, questionable testimonies, and a media frenzy that painted her as a heartless femme fatale. By 4 p.m., Barbara Graham's car rolled through the gates of San Quentin, met by a swarm of reporters and photographers. The press had turned her into a spectacle. 11 journalists had secured spots to witness her execution, eager to capture the final moments of the woman they called Bloody Babs. She sat still, staring into the middle distance, her frail frame accentuated by the severe elegance of a French twist. The hairstyle sharpened her features, making her eyes appear almost too large for her face, whether out of pride or the quiet defiance of a woman making her last public appearance. She had carefully applied eyebrow pencil and lipstick. As the car inched forward, she managed a weak smile. Warden Harley Oteets greeted her outside North Seg and led her to her cell, a cold, featureless box with a cot, a toilet, and a small shelf holding a radio. At his instruction, a tarp had been draped over the gas chamber, shielding her from its grim silhouette until the last possible moment. He offered her a meal, anything she wanted. She declined. The only thing she had consumed on the 10-hour drive from Corona was a milkshake. She was exhausted, her strength sapped by the inevitable. A prison nurse, Barbara Cates, was assigned to her. Warden Teets later confided to reporters, "The poor gal, she's dead beat," though he admitted she mustered a smile when he bummed a cigarette from her. The execution weighed on him too. He had 3 to oversee that day. As night fell in the basement of San Quentin, Graham changed into her red silk pajamas. A Catholic chaplain sat with her, offering prayers, communion, and whatever solace could be found in the quiet hours before the cyanide pellets would drop. Shortly after 10 p.m., attorney Al Matthews arrived at San Quentin with grim news. The California Supreme Court had denied Barbara Graham's final appeal, issuing a terse statement. "This order is final and forthwith." Governor Goodwin Knight, after reviewing every file, report, and petition, also refused to intervene. "I find no basis for executive clemency," he declared. Yet, the fight wasn't officially over. Knight remained at his desk, bracing for the inevitable flood of last-minute pleas to the state's high court. It was routine in death penalty cases, but in one as sensational as Graham's, the stakes and emotions had never been higher. June 3rd, 1955. Barbara Graham spent the night wide awake, chain-smoking, talking with nurse Barbara Cates, and letting classical music fill the silence of her cell. At one point, she sat down to write letters to attorney Al Matthews and journalists, thanking them for their efforts on her behalf. Then came a news break. A radio announcer claimed that 4 couples had offered to adopt her son Tommy. The report was false, but the mere mention of her child sent her into a spiral. The nurse quickly switched the station, trying to steady her. As dawn neared, Graham finally accepted a hot fudge sundae, but after only a few bites, she pushed it aside. Shortly after 9 a.m., Barbara Graham began preparing for the execution with only an hour left until 10 a.m., her time of execution. Still in her red silk pajamas, she calmly combed her hair until the sharp ring of the phone shattered the silence. Warden Harley O'Teets delivered the news. The governor had issued a temporary stay. "Does this mean I'm going to live?" she asked. "No," he replied, but the state Supreme Court had agreed to hear a last-minute petition from her attorney, Al Matthews. The execution was pushed back to 10:45 a.m. Matthews' appeal covered familiar ground, the claim that illegal wiretapping had tainted Graham's trial. But this time he had a new weapon, a ruling just weeks earlier in People v. Khan. In that case, the California Supreme Court overturned the conviction of a powerful Los Angeles bookmaker, declaring that evidence obtained through illegal searches and wiretaps could not be used in court. Matthews argued that the same principle should apply to Graham. Governor Goodwin Knight admitted that one line from the Khan ruling gave him pause. The contention that unreasonable searches and seizures are justified by the necessity of bringing criminals to justice cannot be accepted. At 10:25 a.m., Barbara Graham's final hope vanished. The court denied Al Matthews' appeal, ruling that People v. Khan could not be applied retroactively. 2 minutes later, Governor Goodwin Knight delivered the news at a press conference. The execution was back on. Graham began to prepare. She dressed carefully, combed her hair, and applied lipstick with a steady hand. When she reached for her earrings, her fingers trembled, but she managed to fasten them. Warden Harley O'Teets and 2 guards arrived, carrying a white mesh harness. "What is that for?" she asked, eyeing it warily. "It's a stethoscope," Teets explained. The harness, worn beneath her jacket, connected to a rubber tube that extended outside the gas chamber, allowing a doctor to determine the exact moment of her death without stepping inside. Teets also held a mask, as Graham had requested. "I don't want to look at people," she said. The mask was a relic from the days when California hanged its condemned. When Teets asked her to remove her shoes, she managed a faint smile. "I look better with my shoes on." He allowed it. 2 priests arrived to administer last rites. Placing a St. Jude medallion around her neck, she forced a wry smile. "Thanks. It's a lovely going-away present." The witnesses were in place. 40 people had gathered in the basement of North Seg, watching and waiting. As per her request, no family or friends were among them. Barbara Graham was moments from leaving her cell when the phone rang. Another stay. Matthews had filed a desperate final appeal, arguing that John True, one of the state's key witnesses, had committed perjury. Graham was exhausted. "Why do they torture me?" she cried. "I was prepared to go at 10. She paced her tiny cell, waiting. At 11:15 a.m., the final word came. The court had denied the appeal. There would be no more delays. 15 minutes later, Barbara Graham stepped out of her cell for the final time. Wearing the mask and the white harness beneath her jacket, she walked with quiet resolve. At the chamber door, Warden Teets gently patted her arm. "Goodbye and God bless you," he murmured. Inside, a guard guided her to the steel chair, securing the thick straps around her arms, legs, and chest. He gave her arm a final pat and urged her to breathe deeply once the cyanide pellets dropped. When asked for last words, Graham's voice was steady. Good people are always so sure they're right. As the witnesses, among them 3 officers who had helped convict her, watched, Graham sat motionless. Behind the mask, her lips moved in silent prayer. Then, the execution began. At 11:34 a.m., the door sealed shut, and the executioner pulled the lever. The cyanide pellets dropped. Barbara Graham inhaled, her breathing turning ragged as she tilted her head back. Then, it slumped forward. But death did not come swiftly. Her body jerked, her head flinging back, gasping, again and again, until, at 11:41 a.m., she went still. A minute later, the prison doctor declared her dead. Barbara Graham was officially dead at 11:42 a.m. Warden Harley Teets called it routine. Journalist Gail Cook saw it differently. She died with great dignity at 11:42 a.m. That was her last and final death. Was her execution justice served, or was she doomed from the start by lies, betrayal, and a media frenzy? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you love deep dives into the most controversial true crime cases, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is far from the last.